what I do for a living, is speak while people eat. We do have a question and answer period, and want to leave plenty of time for that, as well as any other program for the Crossroads. But before I begin, because this is the Crossroads Chamber for two communities, one of which I am a resident of, and one of which my father, John Visclosky, is a resident of, is just to say a few words. One, I really appreciate the effort that the officials in the town of Maryville go to, particularly as far as maintaining the town and the quality of the homes and businesses there, as far as being very aggressive on making sure those who own properties in those communities and neighborhoods maintain those properties and neighborhoods, but also making an investment to grow the economy of Maryville. And you have no further to look than their continued good work on Mississippi, and again, the economic development and job opportunities that will create. You look at the community of Crown Point, and one of the things I'm most struck with the last couple of months, again, is the leadership of the council and the mayor in conjunction with the county of Lake County and the federal government in solving a health and property issue in Hermit's Lake. To connect with the sanitary district in Crown Point. And again, it's one of these cooperative efforts your local officials are undertaking that often don't get enough attention, but errs to a lot of different people's benefit, including the homeowners, again, as far as their health and safety, and the disposition of their water, the immediate increase in their property values and the tax base, and providing more customers to the sanitary district in Crown Point itself. And again, that leadership speaks volumes. We had a national holiday yesterday, and I attended a number of services honoring Dr. King, but also met with the superintendent of the Crown Point schools, because while the schools were closed, the superintendent was working during the afternoon. And it's that type of effort and work that I am very proud of that is represented in this room. I will talk about a number of things, including the South Shore, but would also point out that in the foreseeable future, the South Shore trek is not going to go through Maryville. It's not going to go through Crown Point. But again, the political leadership in both of those communities know they are in Lake County, Indiana, as well as the greater Northwest Indiana community. The population of Lake County makes us the 35th largest city in the country. And I'll bet there's some people in this room that own a business in Maryville or Crown Point. You may not live in Crown Point or Maryville. You may live in Crown Point or Maryville, but not work there. They understand we have to collectively grow our economy in both. Have made a financial commitment with a portion of the economic development tax to have that happen. And again, I appreciate that foresight and vision on behalf of the local leadership. But as far as my remarks, I'd like to touch upon three issues, and then again, avail myself of questions or comments you have. The first is our national security. Secondly, the state of the domestic steel industry, and finally, some of those transformational programs that are taking place in Northwest Indiana. I continue to serve as the ranking Democrat on the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. We do have jurisdiction over the Department of Defense and the 17 intelligence agencies of this country, and during the first session continued to work with my chair and colleagues to try to make the best decisions possible as far as the allocation of our nation's resources, so that those agencies can be as effective and as efficient as they can possibly be in the defense of this country. But it also reminds you every day that we are a nation at war, and whether stationed far from our shores or in the United States of America, we all owe a debt of gratitude to every one of those more than 2 million women and men who service in military uniform today. The events within the last week in Hawaii drive home the fact with the death of the Marines that this is a very dangerous occupation they are all engaged in. And we still do have approximately 10,000 troops in Afghanistan. We have over 28,000 troops in South Korea. But most of the attention this past year has obviously been focused on countries such as Syria and Iraq and the Middle East, given the unrest and level of violence in that region of the world. The problems, as I think everyone in this room fully appreciates, is they are intractable. There is a military element, but there is also diplomacy involved, and there is culture involved, there's economics involved. And as we proceed in 2016, we'll continue to work with my colleagues on the subcommittee to bring as much clarity of purpose as possible to that path forward in that region of the world for the defense of this nation. Turning to steel, steel continues to face many challenges in the United States. But I'm very happy to note, since we met just about a year ago, I think it was at the Radisson, it might have been in this room, we have had two very important legislative successes for steel and basic manufacturing in this country that helps ensure a leveler playing field for those who work for a living. They involve the International Trade Commission as well as the Customs and Border Security Agency. The ITC collects information and investigates issues where you have had a violation of our trade laws to make a determination as to the injury to companies and workers in the United States. And again, everyone in this room appreciates there's some countries out there that simply do not cooperate with that process. And some of these investigations take so long that the company or the workers, or both, are gone by the time there is any injury determination. The new law gives the ITC greater flexibility in making those determinations, and if you do not want to cooperate, they can now impute those economic statistics that give us the opportunity to make clear assessments as to the injury to workers and companies involved, as well as to shorten that investigative time frame, and that inures to the benefit of everybody in Northwest Indiana. Customs has many responsibilities, one of which is to collect tariffs and duties at points of entry. And again, I think people in this room understand there are some companies worldwide that exist solely to help other companies circumvent our trade laws. The new legislation gives Customs greater opportunities to investigate when these circumstances occur, and from my perspective, very importantly, sets a deadline so there is an end to these determinations. The conference report to enact this law was approved by the House of Representatives this past month. As we meet here this afternoon, it is my anticipation that the Senate will also approve that legislation in relatively short order. Looking ahead to 2016, would also point out there's a possibility that the United States Congress will consider the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. In the past, I have opposed NAFTA, I have opposed CAFTA, I have opposed trade agreements with countries such as Colombia and South Korea and Panama, because in the end, I think they do lead to loss of manufacturing jobs, in particular in the United States of America. In June of this past year, I also voted against and fought against legislation that was enacted that potentially sets the stage for the consideration of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Act this year. I am opposed to that agreement because I don't think it fundamentally differs from those in the past, and I think it is unfair to expect American workers to compete with those in economies where there are essentially no labor standards at all, where there are essentially no environmental standards at all, and where countries manipulate their currency to their benefit in our detriment. And I also think it's unfair to expect American businesses to compete in many instances with state-owned enterprises internationally that have unlimited resources from their governments and don't participate in what we would consider a market economy. And so as we proceed, we'll continue to be opposed to that agreement, and we'll continue to look for ways, as Vice Chair of the Congressional Steel Caucus, to be of assistance to not just steel, but basic manufacturing and those living wage jobs in the United States of America. The last area I'd like to turn to are transformational investments in Northwest Indiana to grow and to diversify our economy, not so much just for those in this room, but for coming generations in Northwest Indiana. During my forums over the last week, I reminded audiences that people like Rockefeller and Morgan and Carnegie invested money in Northwest Indiana. And as a result, you've seen one of the largest industrial concentrations on the planet Earth right here in Northwest Indiana, and good paying jobs follow. But I think, again, most of us would agree that while steel and oil are the foundations of the economy in Northwest Indiana, they are not job growth industries. And we've got to make, our generation has got to make an investment in our economy like happened 100 years ago, so that we can grow this economy and I am convinced become the next great economic engine for the state of Indiana. One of the components of that investment is the airport in Gary, Indiana. And since we last met a year ago, I am delighted to say that the runway expansion is done. It is completed. And I congratulate Mayor Freeman Wilson on her leadership, on her success, and have joined with her and others to take one of the next steps necessary, and that is to have a customs facility at the airport, so that the airport authority and the city of Gary can have greater flexibility as a type of cargo and charter and commercial service they can attract to that airport. I also think we need to continue to make an investment as far as opening up our access to one of the great resources on the planet Earth, and that is Lake Michigan. Not only for the principle that no matter who you are, no matter what your station in life is or what you look like, you ought to be able to get to Lake Michigan and not have to pay somebody for it. But for the economic development and economic growth that represents. Some of you have been to Pierogi Fest in Whiting and seen those new businesses, seen those new homes. You look at the improvements on the lake shore in East Chicago. You drive down Main Street in East Chicago, you see new construction in East Chicago in the harbor. You go to Portage, you have new businesses. You have growth in the city of Portage. They have a lakefront park instead of an industrial dump site. And we have had, again, over the last 12 months, success. There was a groundbreaking in Portage this past summer to add another 69 acres onto the Lake Michigan shoreline. And I would congratulate, again, Mayor Snyder for his leadership and good work, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers. And the last investment I'd like to talk about this morning is improvement and expansion of the South Shore to grow our economy in Northwest Indiana. There is no question we need to undertake this particular investment. The fact is, when we talk about this, people ask me, why are my taxes going up to pay for the South Shore? Other people ask me, what's in it for me? I don't ride a train. I want to be clear this morning. There are no new taxes involved with the improvement or the expansion of the South Shore Railroad. All of us send our money to Washington, D.C. in taxes. We send it to Indianapolis in taxes. We send it to local units of government in taxes. Those monies are going to be spent whether the South Shore changes at all or not. What we're asking for is a dedication of a small portion of what's called an economic development tax to grow this economy. And for those who ask, what's in it for me? I would rather ask the question, what's in it for us? And as I probably mentioned last year, let's look west. And on the other side of that state line, you have over 400 miles of mass transit lines. And when you look at the communities to the west, in the south and the north of the city of Chicago, you have to remember that their median household income since 1970 has increased anywhere from 12 to 48%. And then you look on the east side of that state line. And instead of more than 400 miles of line, we've got 38 running to Michigan City, and then it obviously goes on to South Bend. The result? In Lake County during the same period of time, median household income has declined by 19.5%, and we've lost 10% of our population. We do need to make this investment. We need to improve that existing line to reduce that travel time. All of you, think about this. If you can get on a South Shore train on 11th Street in Michigan City and get to the city of Chicago within 60 minutes or less, that entire economy that is larger than Sweden comes out to these 3 county areas. And remember, there are technology and pharmaceutical, among many other manufacturing jobs in those western and northern and southern suburbs, and why not do that in the state of Indiana? We have had some, if you would, setbacks this year in that we didn't have success in some of our requests, and we have had a very glowing success. The Regional Development Authority for Lake and Porter County applied for what people understand are the Regional Cities Program, and this keeps falling down. Appreciate that. I'm not going to repeat everything I said. And we're not successful in their application for the state. So I think we're pretty strong, tough people. We dust ourselves off and, okay, let's go at it again, and where else are there funds? The city of Gary had an application for a grant from the Department of Transportation to begin work at the South Shore Station in the Miller community of Gary. I must say I was abjectly disappointed that the federal government did not grant Gary that monies. And would tell you that Friday of this week, we are going to have a meeting with the Department of Transportation to sit down with them and say, okay, we didn't get it, fine. How can we do better next year? But would also point out that we have had a great success. And I would congratulate every one of our area state legislators, Republican and Democrat alike, House and Senate members, for coming together and convincing the state of Indiana to make a commitment this past spring to help fund a third of that non-federal portion that we need to extend the South Shore area. So as we proceed in 2016, we'll simply close by assuring you that I and others who are like-minded, there are a lot of people out there of this mind, will continue to work very hard and with us there's a sense of urgency to make sure that this happens. But with that, I do assume some questions will be asked, and we'll be happy to turn to those. I'm trying to stop spilling.